Secretary, if you would call the roll.
Yes, sir. Chairman Pine,
He's here.
Member Hernandez Ketchum.
Here.
Thank you. Member Freed.
Here.
Member Sue.
Here.
Member Shaw. Member Zarrilli.
Here.
We have a quorum, Mr.
Thank you. Thanks very much. The first order of business then is the approval of minutes of the September 9 meeting. You all have had a chance to review them. Are there any suggestions for revision? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Adam. Second?
Second.
Hey,
guess what?
Thank you. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Then the minutes are approved unanimously. We'll go to the fourth agenda item. Well, I guess we have to go to the third agenda item first, and then we'll go to the fourth. There is a presentation on the audited financial and investment results for fiscal year 2024. I see Raymond's here, for sure. I don't know how much of that you want to take on.
We've just two slides we're going to present very quickly, and then we can proceed to the vote.
Okay.
The highlight from the board's perspective is the board revenues for the year were very strong. We met plan, we in fact exceeded plan on an operating revenue basis. The key drivers of that were the 4.42% rate increase adopted by the board last year, and complemented by the efforts of DEP to continue to enforce the bills and revenue collections through the water notices, in a small number of cases, shut-offs, and then kind of the very, very effective and kind of aggressive outreach by the customer service team to work with customers to get them into payment agreements, to get overdue balances documented and under control and into a structure that the customers can afford. And Albert and his team have done a fantastic job of kind of getting to one of those agreements and kind of getting things to a manageable place. So that was a very complementary effort to that rate increase the board approved last year. Together, those two efforts generated a very positive revenue year for the board.
Thank you all.
Thank you. This year is off to a positive trend as well. Revenues year to date are up over last year. Things will improve.
This morning we're 8% above last year, so as of this morning. Yeah, 2% above plan. Yes. Yeah.
The other thing I want to flag before we proceed to the vote is the board's investment income, which was for many, we viewed our investment accounts as a savings vehicle, and the board is designed to be a pass-through, so the money ultimately, the rates, is given to the city or to the water authority to pay for DEP's operation, to pay the bondholders for the cost of the debt. Because of the way that the timing of the cash flows is structured, we end up holding savings for a period of usually about 6 months in the second half of the year. And we don't like to keep the money in the bank account, obviously, so we invest it, and we've had for many years a very, very low-risk investment strategy buying short-term U.S. government bills. And that low-risk approach, in a sense, cost us for many years because we made money consistently, but not a lot of money. But it's oddly enough, in the last 2 years, taken our investment earnings to north of $30 million, $35 million in 24 and 31 the year before, because of that pop in short-term rates from essentially 0 to the 4 to 5% range. And it's been actually a very positive and unsung thing, because for an exclusively fixed income portfolio, a lot of large investors, long-term treasury investors lost half their money to trough. Diversified bond investors lost 30 to 40% of their money. We actually made money every single year during that time. So it's kind of been guided by those very conservative investment guidelines the board has consistently encouraged us to follow, and by the judicious trading, the controller's trading desk helping us pick the right bills and the right investments. It's something a little bit I want to brag about for the team and for the board's guidance on that, because we made money every year the last 5 years with fixed income invested. That's unusual in fixed income. So the two things I want to highlight.
All right, sir. Well, thank you. Let's see. we have a representative of the independent auditor here. And we met on Monday for the first time, and I will apologize now, but I don't remember your name.
Christian Wacker, I'm
Christian
the
Wacker.
manager of the audit.
We got the controller of the municipal water finance authority here, and we of course have the treasurer of the water board here. Are there any questions from any of the members? Adam and I sit on the joint committee of the two boards, and we were present on Monday for the presentation.
Yeah, the one thing I'll note, which is of interest, is leveraging some of the new AI and machine learning opportunities. It's really interesting to hear how the auditors are now able to be much more targeted in what ledger items they're able to audit and identify, as they used to do a large sample that was a random sample to say, all right, let's just test these. Now they're able to say, within these parameters, what we think is normal, let's flag every ledger entry what is not normal, what's happening on a weekend, what is a round number, what is recurring, what would we expect to happen, and then specifically audit those. So really interesting to hear how they're being able to much sharper and more focused within the audit that can try to identify any fraud or other things that may not normally be there. So it's just interesting evolution, having now sat on this committee for 10 years. Every year there are innovations that are happening. This seems to be not just a minor one, but a really huge leap forward in being able to identify and then check that with humans after the fact. So it's just really interesting, and look forward to seeing the continued evolution of new tools to help us make sure we're even better stewards of the finances we have.
Adam, thank you. The joint committee has recommended to each of the two boards that board approve the independent auditor's report on the audited financial statements of the system for fiscal years ended June 2023, I'm sorry, June 30, 23, and June 30, 24. And authorize, and that each board authorize the release of the audited financial statements. Are there any questions from the members? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the resolution?
So moved.
Thank you, Adam. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Need to do something.
Any
Are there any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion is approved, and the resolution is approved unanimously.
The other quick thing I'd say too is also there were no substantive negative findings, so that's also a positive. So just for the
Completely unmodified. Thank you. The fifth item on the agenda then is a resolution item. It's a vote on the approval of the investment guidelines for fiscal year 2024 investment report. Are there slides on that, or?
Beyond this goes, the report includes the investment guidelines.
Yes.
The guidelines that we're suggesting would be adopted for fiscal '25 are the same, or on a prospective basis, are the same guidelines we had in fiscal '24.
There are no changes.
Yeah, there are no changes. The allowable assets are U.S. government obligations or equivalent. And the investment strategy we intend to follow going forward is the same of buying treasury bills. So a conservative subset of what's permitted in an already very conservative set of allowable assets.
Got it. Are there any questions from the members? Hearing none, this is our last resolution item. Vote on the approval of investment guides for fiscal year 2024 investment report. May I have a motion, please, to approve the resolution?
So moved.
Is that you, Dan?
It is.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you very much, Adam. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion passes, the resolution passes unanimously. There are several presentations scheduled. The first is an update on DEP strategic initiatives.
Well, so we put this on the agenda in response to an inquiry that Adam had made for an update on where our strategic plan was. Of course, you will recall that more than a year and a half ago, getting close to 2 years ago, the Water Board approved funding for DEP to hire a consultant and conduct a strategic plan. We did that. We undertook benchmarking. The consultant wrapped up their work in the third quarter of 2023, and we did some informal presentations from the consultant to each of you were invited we presented all of those findings to OMB and others, a number of stakeholders around the city and other stakeholders that we work with closely at DEP, like environmental organizations. Since then, we made the decision, I made the decision that the actual crafting of the strategic plan needed to be done in-house. This wasn't something that we wanted to outsource to a consulting firm. Of course, doing it in-house without a dedicated strategy staff has taken some real time. I'm pleased with what we did. We assembled a group of internal staff. There was a Commissioner Strategic Planning committee that was created across multiple bureaus. And we have been refining the plan over the last many months now. At the suggestion of some of our colleagues at OMB, we've actually changed the terminology to reflect the fact that it really is a long-range vision. It does have a 20 to 30-year time horizon. It's not something that is focused on the next 4 or 5 years. There are things that we are putting in there that we believe we need to start thinking about that we are not budgeted for, that frankly would not or not even should be in the next 10-year capital plan, because it really is about thinking about the far future. That is, of course, to my mind, one of the hallmarks of this agency, right? We have a 180-year history of thinking not over the next 4 years, over the next 10 years, but actually over the next 50 or 100 years, right? And that goes back to the 19th century, and it has served New York City really well. And we know that New York City has been served poorly when we only think about our infrastructure in short-term periods. And so we've embraced the idea that OMB made and offered around calling this a long-range vision. So in any case, we are working on getting that, figuring out actually what approvals truly must be received and what is merely suggestion. Lots of people think they have veto power. They don't all. But nonetheless, we have a lot to say. Moving on. As we, oh, all right, we are sharing this slide. Okay. We had it's up, I guess we're sharing it. So we had shared this slide with a number of you separately. McKinsey did identify a number of themes and implications that we have to take seriously. Increasing, we've talked at length, I have talked at length in this board and publicly about the threats of climate change. One of the things that we are working, well, there are a couple of things that this has shaped our work on quite dramatically. A couple of weeks ago, I went down to Trenton, New Jersey. Don't often venture across the river in my official capacity, but I was there and actually really pleased to be joined by the Assistant Secretary of the Army to sign an MOU because DEP and the Army Corps are jointly funding a study. This is kind of interesting, right? We are jointly funding a study on how the Army Corps can manage a reservoir in Pennsylvania differently. And you might ask, how does that relate to DEP? Why is it a good use of utility money? But the reality is, as you well know, is that half of our water consumption comes from the Delaware watershed. And DEP is part of a compact where we have to manage our diversions from the Delaware and our releases into the Delaware in a way that takes into account the needs of the downstream users of the Delaware, which includes the majority of the population of New Jersey, and among others, the entire city of Philadelphia. And as climate change increases sea level, it is pushing the salt front of the Delaware River more and more upriver. That actually creates a significant long-term threat to New York City, because if the salt front moves up, we may need to release more water out of our Delaware reservoirs to push the salt front down. One way that we can avoid using our water to defeat the salt front is by having some of the other reservoirs that are downriver of our reservoirs play a more active role. But the Army Corps' reservoirs, they have several reservoirs that feed into the Delaware, were chartered for flood control only, not for drinking water management. And as you know, the Army Corps is quite literal about what it can and cannot do. And it is quite deliberative. And so before they make any decisions about managing the releases of that water for anything but flood control, there must be a study. It is something we have been pushing for several years, but it has, in part as a result of this work, been one of my top priorities, and kind of ironic when we are also talking in my role as Chief Climate Officer and with DEP's new coastal responsibility. I'm talking with the Army Corps regularly about a $50 to $100 billion project to protect New York Harbor. I'm also calling the Assistant Secretary to make sure that he can get the $500,000 match to our money so we can keep this study going. But he did us the courtesy of recognizing how important this is, both to New York City and to the city of Philadelphia, by making the trip in person. And so I also got to meet the new Commanding General of the Army Corps at that event. But that's just one component. We've also been spending a lot of time over the last year and a half talking about the changing risks to the filtration avoidance determination. And one of the things that is wonderful, and of course we're in the process of negotiating the diversion or the withdrawal permit that follows on the most recent 5-year midpoint review of the FAD. And one of the things that we are recognizing is that the threats to our water quality are changing. We've done a very good job of managing the human waste and agricultural runoff challenges that were the main threats in the 1990s. But going forward, the combination of more frequent storms and frankly, the increase in wildlife in our watershed, right? Anybody who lives in the suburbs of New York knows that the deer population, the eagles and hawks, raccoons, all sorts of wildlife, is far and away greater than it was 30 years ago. Those things, combining with increasing water standards, particularly around disinfection byproducts, become the kinds of threats that really face the filtration avoidance determination going forward. And that's going to require the FAD to evolve. It's one of the reasons that the Bureau of Water Supply, we've hired a new assistant commissioner who I'm really excited about. We actually recruited her all the way from Alaska. And so she's made a greater than average relocation to join our team up in Kingston, and is leading a team that is in charge of thinking about the long-term shaping of the FAD. One of the things I have noted here is that DEP, frankly, has not traditionally played a leading role in the shape of the FAD, frankly, because we have not had the stature, we have not had the credibility with the watershed communities, with the environmentalists, with the state. And so we have been forced to play a secondary role. And I have been very intentionally working over the last 2.5 years to change that, to increase our credibility with the watershed communities, to really focus on the extent to which our policies are shaped by the science. And I think that will play a significant role. The next FAD has to be renegotiated for 2027, it's quite soon. And my concern is that if we merely continue the way the FAD has been going, it will actually not be fit for purpose in 5 or 10 years. And so ironically, continuing the FAD as is increases the risk of requiring filtration, whereas the FAD evolving is the way that we fend off those risks. And in some ways, actually, the greatest defense is always to be prepared. We have noted, spent a lot of time talking with our peer agencies that have unfiltered supplies, and of course, we're about to lose one as the city of Portland has lost its faculty. And there, we've seen a disastrous situation where they are, to use a technical term, paying through the nose to build their filtration plant because they were unprepared. They did not have the plans on the shelf. And the EPA gave them only 10 years to get their plant built. And so, of course, if you are going to bid on a construction project for a massively complex system, and you know that, and the bidders know that you will face massive fines on a daily basis if you were a day late, they do not cut you a deal. They do the opposite. So they are paying $2 billion for a plant that is a tenth the size of what we do.
So we're now one of
It is
4 cities
scary.
with the FAT?
Sorry?
Now there are only 4 cities with FATs? Or major
I
cities?
believe it's down to 5. I think we are the 5th.
Okay. San Francisco.
Seattle, Boston, San Francisco, us, and what's the town in Alaska that Shiloh comes from?
Okay.
Sorry? It's not Juneau. Sitka. Sitka? No, I'm sorry. Let me get back to you. Let me not. But in fact, one of the reasons that Shiloh was so well qualified to be our assistant commissioner, she's one of the few people who has managed a filtered or an unfiltered system, and so that was a real qualification that she brings to us. And of course, they have an entirely different set of issues in Alaska, and so she brings an open mind to this, which I'm really excited about. So those are among the things that we are very much thinking about. As we see, and we will talk about later on in today's agenda, among the regulatory trends that McKinsey identified as really shaping the future of our system are changes in drinking water standards and changes in effluent standards. We've talked with you in the past about PFAS. We've got really stringent requirements that have already been put in place that are going to shape what we do going forward around nitrogen. That's particularly important in 2 parts of New York Harbor, Jamaica Bay being one and the Upper East River being another. We have 4 plants in the Upper East River. We have 3 plants around Jamaica Bay. Part of our long-term vision is completely reimagining how we think about those plants because we frankly will not be able to meet our nitrogen targets if we continue on the track that we are on. And then I'll talk in a moment about the lead and copper rule, which has been evolving significantly over the last 10 years. And in fact, the EPA issued the final new lead and copper rule just yesterday. It was reported in the New York Times. You may have seen that. We have a number of issues. I've talked with you already publicly about the fact that as we know, climate change is going to, and these other threats are going to require us to increase our capital investment. That also requires us to be even better stewards of the water rate by reducing our OPEX as much as we can, and that has been a real issue. And of course, there's been a constant set of reminders that we have to take supply chain seriously. 2 years ago, and what was top of mind when McKinsey was doing this work was the 2 points in 2022 when we were worried about a national railroad strike. And we at DEP had to do contingency planning for things like chemicals that we rely on. That we had to understand what our on-hand supply of those chemicals was, what our suppliers' on-hand supply was, and where they were getting them. We just literally went through exactly the same exercise over the last couple of weeks as the longshoreman strike evolved, and we had to think about what would those supply chain disruptions do to us. So those are things that we are thinking about, and of course recruiting, which is a constant issue, not only for city government, narrowly defined, but across the economy. So these are some of the things that McKinsey left us with, and that we are building very much into already the decisions that we have been making as an agency. They will shape what we take to OMB, because as you know, this January, that is every 2 years the city does its 10-year capital plan. This year, with all the work we have done, with this work here, with a lot of focus that we've had internally on state of good repair needs within the agency, and with the stormwater resilience work that we've done, and you know we put out a stormwater resilience update in earlier in the year that identified just how big a nut we will have to make New York City resilient to stormwater. This upcoming upcoming capital plan will be very much shaped, if DEP has anything to do with it, by this thinking, and this is going to shape our long-range capital vision. I mean, our long-range vision. Next. These are the 7 external pressures. Again, this is a digest of the previous findings in some ways, but these are things that you can read faster than I can see. Certainly taking, certainly you can read faster than I can say, certainly taking environmental justice and equity also very much into account. As you may know, the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice earlier this year released an environmental justice report that was required by City Council legislation, required by local law. The next phase in that is that next year, MOCEJ is required to release an EJ plan, and at the same time, there was a charter requirement that we are working on fulfilling right now, that next year, the city has to release a racial equity strategy. And DEP, there were a number of things identified in the EJ report. As you know, 13 of our 14 wastewater treatment plants are in or adjacent to EJ neighborhoods. As I often point out, when something goes wrong at our treatment plants, the first people who suffer are our staff. The second people who suffer are our neighbors. And so state of good repair itself is an EJ issue because when we underinvest in our treatment plants, we are underinvesting in being good neighbors for our environmental justice neighborhoods. So those are things we are taking on very, very seriously. And with efficiency, you know, Adam, you were just talking about AI. One of the things that McKinsey identified is that, frankly, we have underinvested in technology, particularly in our wastewater treatment plants. We've actually done a very good job upstate because we have so many new facilities with the UV plant, with filtration. We've actually done a very good job at the Bureau of Water and Sewer Operations. You know, with my background, having come from Google Sidewalk Labs, I was immediately looking to see what we did, and of course, you know, our crews, they have the tablets, they are out on the street when they respond to a water main break or something. They have the computerized data at their fingertips, and one of the things we did as part of our stormwater resilience work was build what we call the all pipes model. The teams don't really like it when I call it a digital twin because it may not be quite what a digital twin leads people to think. But we now have, for the first time, a full dynamic model of all of the sewer lines in the system, and that allows us to do stormwater planning in a way that, frankly, we've never been able to do before. But at the Bureau of Water and Bureau of Wastewater Treatment, frankly, we have a lot of outdated systems that eat up a lot of labor time for things that in peer agencies that have more recent facilities like DC Water. We spend a lot of time benchmarking ourselves against DC Water, where they've done a massive set of investments over the last decade in their, what's it called, Blue Springs? Anyway, their wastewater treatment plant in Anacostia, which I visited with our team, you know, they have much greater efficiencies than we do, and that is something that we are working on, and to that end, in fact, more than, actually almost 2 years ago, for the first time, we appointed an assistant commissioner at BWT for technology. We've never had such a senior leader at BWT whose only portfolio was in technology, and that was done intentionally to elevate the stature and attention and give Reggie, who's a great leader, who comes from our Bureau of Information Technology, the authority and stature he needs to drive change. And our Deputy Commissioner, Angela Lillo, has been a constant champion of this since she took over a year and a half ago.
Reggie kicked off this big project 2 days ago.
2 days ago, yes. We unfortunately, as much as we've done wonderful things in procurement, we had one of our longer procurements was something that he had kicked off soon after he got that role. But as Marissa points out, we did finally get that contract approved and kicked off SCADA project just 2 days ago. Excellent. Juke, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for the update. Yeah, I kind of have a two-part question around that. I think it's like really fascinating, especially hearing from Adam around how I guess either LLMs are going to use an audit, and then you mentioned these kind of future changes, underinvestment, but activities to kind of to invest in that and shepherd that. I know AI and LLMs are affecting a lot of things, and I think the twin also of cybersecurity at the same time as an infrastructure. So I guess the first part of the question is, and there's a lot of change going on right now, obviously. How do you see those things affect these plans? Because I know some of this is maybe a 10 or 20 year horizon, you said long-term vision, but I think it depends on what viewpoint. Like some of these things can be happening like very quickly now.
Yeah.
And so how do you see that for the agency and thinking about that is one. And then two, really from a talent procurement perspective, addressing this, is a DVP itself is able to do this, or is this like, I don't know how it works to do it, is it a larger effort that's more challenging? Like how do those two things intersect?
So let me say some things, and then Marissa or Albert, who's got a strong IT background as well, works a really integrated way with BIT, can speak to. Because of course our IT team reports into Marissa as CFO. But just quickly, first of all, I started this job about 3 weeks before Russia invaded Ukraine. And so one of the very first things I did was start to get smart on our cybersecurity risks. In New York City, and it's always foolhardy to say that you're in good shape when it comes to things like that, because the threats are always evolving. However, I think New York City is better off than most. The creation of the New York City Cyber Command is widely recognized as being state-of-the-art in municipal government cybersecurity defense. And we work very closely with Cyber Command and with the Department of Homeland Security. DHS, I've had several meetings myself with DHS and Cyber Command, and I'm very pleased that I know DHS and the FBI and others recognize that DEP is obviously a really attractive target to anybody who might want to harm the United States. And so we get a lot of attention from it. Without going into too much detail, which would of course be inappropriate, I got reassured that to the extent that anybody can have a good cybersecurity plan, given the fact that the threats are constantly evolving and the biggest risk is complacency, I got reassured that we are in good shape. And of course, one of the things that is important is the very clear separation between business systems and operating systems, right? So that separation between IT and OT. I think many of us paid very clear attention a couple of years ago when the Continental Gas Pipeline was shut down. Of course, what was really shut down was their billing system, right?
Yeah.
And in a for-profit environment, if you cannot meter and charge for the gas that you are providing, you actually have to stop providing the gas. That was their vulnerability. It was not their SCADA system. We do not have that metric, right? Frankly, if somebody were to attack our billing system, we would take the revenue hit. We would have no choice. But of course, above all else, we would protect the public and we would protect the business. And so we look at our risks to our operating system. We would never discount the risks. We pay a lot of attention to our IT protection. But our highest priority, of course, is to protect the quality and the supply of the drinking water. Nothing exceeds that in our attention. And again, without suggesting we should ever be complacent, it's constantly evolving. I became comfortable that we are doing everything that we can and should. And there are lots and lots of fail-safes to keep us going. And I was really pleased that a lot of that preparation was there for us a couple of months ago, when of course CrowdStrike shut down large chunks of the entire world. And we knew exactly where our risks were, we knew exactly what we had to do, we knew exactly where our risks were not. And so we were able to respond to that. And I will say, I was really proud of New York City government as a whole, because quite literally this administration had done a tabletop exercise, a simulation involving City Hall agency heads, up to and including the first deputy mayor in those exercises, for a massive cybersecurity attack. It was just coincidence that CrowdStrike happened only a few weeks after we had done this citywide effort. But I think we were able to respond. We knew what we had to do. So I was really pleased with that. I spent so much time on the cyber part of your question that I've now forgotten the first part of your question.
Oh, sorry. So around AI and cyber are both related, and things are changing very quickly. That's really reassuring to hear about the cyber part of it.
Now,
and
I will say hiring is one of our biggest challenges. In general, city salaries are fundamentally uncompetitive. I think many people are drawn to city government not because of the compensation, but it is even more difficult when the skills are completely transferable to one of the most lucrative and fast-growing sections of the private sector. And so we work really hard to keep our IT people. We are constantly looking to get them more money and higher salaries and fight to retain and attract the best. That is one of our constant challenges.
Do you see, because the changes in cyber and AI, like this changes from a 10 or 20-year vision around those investments to something quicker? And I don't know if it applies at all, but I know AI has
No,
had a lot of.
I think it does apply, and what I would say is, as we've been working through this plan, we have a chapter on sort of general business operations efficiency, and that's where I think we have just a huge amount of opportunity. On the OT side, we just fundamentally don't have the SCADA systems we should have of a modern wastewater utility, so that's now, as Rit said, a huge focus, and we have like tens of millions of dollars worth of investment happening in the next few years to kind of bring that up to scratch. On the business operations side, I think we have a huge opportunity as well, because we don't function as a sort of modern commercial business would on that side, and so I think we have an opportunity to kind of leapfrog over like more sort of, I guess, 10 or 20 year ago ERP type approach to something that would be, where we can do something more interesting and creative because of AI. And I think it's just the challenge, frankly, from my perspective, understanding it quite well as I do now after 2 years. It's really the interface with the legacy, or I maybe shouldn't call them legacy always, but the base city systems that we have to use, whether it's the basic employee management system, whether it's the basic procurement system, whether it's the basic accounting system, we have to use those systems as part of the City of New York. So the question is, how can we build around them to make the rest of our processing in-house more efficient and somehow interface with them? And I think that's really going to be the art, because the billing system is a great example. The billing system is ours alone. We don't have to interface with anybody. So we were able to take it and build it from scratch over the last couple of years and have our actual, very modern system. But when we talk about a lot of these other operations, we have to in some way interact with those city systems. So the question is going to be, can we, how much can we do in-house? How much can we interface? And will other agencies potentially let us interface with them?
Is that usually a department decision or a city? I imagine the city as a whole is trying to think about, actually I don't know, these issues.
Yes.
Right?
What's been exciting to me is we have a chief performance officer for the City of New York, and she comes, she was at Department of Finance, but she also comes originally from GE, a very Six Sigma driven person. So she's really interested in these questions and things like robotic process automation. How can the city look to those pieces? So she's interested in fundamental business efficiency and then coupling that with IT. So, she's working on a number of projects that have been more focused on services side of the city, but she's also looking at things that could work for the whole city as well. And I was just at a meeting last week with her pitching us as a pilot for hiring optimization, for example.
That's cool.
So I think there's a lot we can do over the next few years.
So looking ahead, what we've identified as part of our long-term vision are these 10 strategic goals. As Marissa pointed out, business processes are one of them. One of the things that I find so significant, of course, culturally, DEP is a civil engineering organization, right? And at our heart, we operate and invest in, design and build massive civil works. And this is Dr. John Jervis, who's chief engineer of New York City, and one of the world's most cutting-edge civil engineers back in the 1830s when he built the Trenton system. But the reality is that our business processes shape how well our civil engineers can do their jobs. So that is one of the things, one of the reasons that it's been so important for us to focus on procurement, to focus on HR, to focus on attracting the right talent. But there's a lot of things here, many of which we have discussed. Of course, air noise and hazmat is the non-waterboard part of our mission, but important for us to include in an agency-wide long-range vision. But some of the examples here, and again, I'll talk more about lead service lines in a moment, and I already talked on the right-hand side at the bottom is around being a good neighbor. I mentioned our nitrogen issues. There are two big opportunities that we see going forward with our treatment plants. One is, as you probably know, the City Council mandated several years ago a study around whether Rikers Island, if it were to cease being a jail, could be an attractive site for wastewater operations. Obviously, finding more, one of our biggest challenges at our wastewater treatment plants, and something that drives up our costs dramatically compared to our peers, is we have no extra space, right? If you look at our peer agencies at their wastewater treatment plants, they have so much acreage compared to us. And that finally came to me. Blue Plains is the treatment plant in Washington. They have been able literally to stand up an entire parallel wastewater treatment plant that just does primary treatment during storm events. And that is part of their CSO strategy, right, to protect the Anacostia River. We do not have the space for that at any of our treatment plants. Furthermore, we don't even have the space for bypass operations. So literally half of our cost when we do an upgrade at our treatment plants, our cost is double or more what it would be at another plant, because half of our cost is the investment in how do you keep the place running while you do the work, right? And it is nuts. And so the idea that we might actually find a site that doesn't have neighbors, that is frankly quite polluted, and therefore, doesn't have a lot of residential opportunity or anything else, is super strategic for DEP. I think our report on that got a lot of consensus earlier in the year. I've had a number of conversations with the Lippman Commission, which is kind of the external advisory group, and they have indicated that they are convinced that DEP is a great future use for Rikers Island if it becomes available. And so that provides an opportunity to think differently about our 4 treatment plants. Maybe there's a 5th site. It probably doesn't mean we could ever give up our sites, but we could think about these 5 locations as an interconnected network rather than as 4 discrete treatment plants. Similarly, around Jamaica Bay, there is an opportunity to think about how we think differently. We have our treatment plant in Far Rockaway, which of course was completely flooded during Hurricane Sandy and is our most at-risk site in terms of flooding. Frankly, we probably shouldn't be expecting our Far Rockaway plant to be there 30 or 50 years from now, given the way sea level rise is going, even though we have to make sure we keep it going for a while, so we can't just write it off today. We've still got to protect it. And one of our biggest challenges is our 26th Ward plant and our Jamaica plant put effluent into Jamaica Bay. And that has 2 issues. One, of course, it's a huge nitrogen challenge because of the fragility of Jamaica Bay. And the other is that any reasonable plan to protect Jamaica Bay from sea level rise probably involves some sort of sea gate at the entrance to Jamaica Bay. And that means that during an event when those gates are closed, we have a huge problem if we are putting effluent into Jamaica Bay. So we are beginning to think about what it would look like to think differently about how we deal with our effluent and somehow get it straight into the ocean, where, of course, we would not have the nitrogen issues. We might still have to treat it, of course, to a very high standard, but it would not have the same fragility impact on the bay. So that's the kind of thing we have to think about. That is not something we will have accomplished in 10 years, right? So it is not necessarily within the scope of a 10-year capital plan, but it is precisely the kind of thing that in the spirit of the third water tunnel, which of course was planned in the 1930s and we will finish in the 2030s, we have to start thinking about ideas like this now. Next. Oh, that was it. So anyway, so there's a lot of work. You know, obviously it takes a lot of work to get an ambitious document like this through. But I appreciate the request because, of course, we have been making very good use of the Water Board's investment in the consulting work, even if you haven't seen the public document just yet.
Commissioner, we would expect no less.
Kind of you to say, Mr. Chairman. Yes.
Is there a follow-up question? I noticed some of this is not in the 10-year capital plan. How does like a vision or like once it's published and finalized translate into investments? And I know that's a big question, and sorry if I don't know the answer to this question, but what's the...
Well, look, a long-range vision has no legal status, right? It is not binding. It is merely a question of whether within the agency, between the agency and City Hall, between the agency and OMB, between you all, the Water Board, etc., if we have a shared understanding of what the priorities are, right, then at the appropriate time, they will get the investments that they need, right? And some of that is about leadership, right? I mean, as we know, the reason the third water tunnel is going to be completed in 2032 is because Mayor Bloomberg decided it was actually an important thing to invest in, right? And then DEP and OMB and the Water Board, et cetera, got into motion and got that project restarted and back on track. You know, some of it is about putting ideas out there with the logic and hoping that future administrations, future generations agree, you know, putting out an idea that you ask for other people to reassess, because of course, as you pointed out, circumstances may change, who knows, right?
Yeah.
But you put out your best thinking now in the hopes that it stimulates action.
So in terms of that translation, I think it was like this summer when there was discussion on what's the role and authority of the board in these investments. Is that right? Kind of, we're kind of discussing that a little bit.
We were getting some clarity on.
Some clarity
Yeah.
around that. So like, is that, so for example, as an example, is there a world in which, I guess, some of these projects, like we would help determine or you would help recommend that, or is that a mutual decision? Like how does that really work? If there's like an ambitious important investment that you want to prioritize based on this work?
Ultimately, the capital plan is actually decided by OMB, right? And so ultimately, it rests with City Hall. DEP, of course, develops our proposals. We send our proposals over to OMB. There is an ultimate determination, but presumably the responsibility is between the budget director and the mayor as to what is invested in and what the level of investment is. Of course, as you well know, that also then comes to you all because the size of our capital plan directly translates into the rate hikes that we ask you all to approve. And so that is part of the balance that we have to set, which is also why operating efficiency is so important to us. So that if we want to invest more, we also have to do everything we can to have lower OpEx. And it also shapes how we think about affordability and future of our rate structure. We'll get to our thinking on MCP in a moment. And just yesterday, I was having a meeting to finalize the sustainable rate study, which will be coming out this year. I commit to that.
This calendar year.
Yes.
The one kind of building on that, I would say, you know, as fiscal stewards of the water system for the board, I would just offer and request that you have an opportunity to come back and let us know how the strategic plan and long-term vision is progressing, and if there are challenges getting it approved, knowing that it's beyond your control, I would request from the water board that others then come and present to us what their vision may be, absent the ability to approve the one that you guys have set. Given our $3 million investment in the plan, and given the tremendous importance that having this vision and publicly laying it out for key decision makers within the administration, within the council, outside advocates, us as well, can avail ourselves of that. I really see it as critical importance to all of our collective work.
No, that's an interesting point. I don't know if there's precedent for it. I know obviously we've got Chris. I don't think Stephen's here. Stephen chairs our task force at OMB, but Chris, I think, is the ranking person here today. So, I'm sure you could ask our colleagues at OMB to talk.
I don't anticipate any challenges with it being approved, but just something that we will continue to want to know about and be aware of.
And just on a tactical, practical basis, GK, back to your question, as we go through the planning for the 10-year plan this fall, we're mapping, all the projects against the strategic plan. So we see, we'll be able to kind of, just show that picture of.
We'll be able to get that mapping and report on that?
We'll be pulling that together as kind of a basis to show, in that collection of 30 billion or so that we'll be proposing, which projects are kind of addressing which sections of the plan.
Is there any, very related to this, I think, but is there any continuing or ongoing conversation around the board's concerns about the rental payment and how that impacts, the ability to invest in, critical needs for the agency?
Well, look, the rental payment is, as you know, as we've discussed, is not something that DEP actually has any control over.
Understood.
It's a direct request from OMB to the water board. It is as of right, basically, from OMB. I think that is a question around whether the rate impact of paying the rental payment shapes the thinking around an acceptable level of capital investment. And again, it's something that DEP does not really directly control, so I'm not sure what I can say.
One other, maybe related but maybe not, the EPA had put out something on fluoride recently. Is there anything that the agency has to say about that, or how that either may be impacting this or just regular operations?
I will say I saw that. I have not had the chance to talk with our folks about exactly the implications of it, so perhaps let me get back to you at our next meeting.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other questions? Then I guess we move on.
Member Freed had asked.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
I don't know if if you regret it or not.
Not yet, not yet.
Very helpful.
Next. No. All right, so I mentioned at some length changing regulation as one of our big issues, or one of the things that DEP will need to respond to over the future. One that has had a lot of attention is around lead service lines, and given that this is going to be in the news this month, and actually was as of yesterday, I thought it was appropriate to let the water board know what's going on. So just yesterday, EPA published what were long expected, and so we knew this was coming, didn't know it was going to be yesterday, but this was not a real surprise. A further increase in the stringency of what is called the lead and copper rule. Among the changes is that basically it requires utilities to replace all of the lead service lines under the utilities control within 10 years. That's an important point. It sets much more aggressive and stringent sampling requirements. And I'll come to what that implies for us. It lowers the action level, so currently it is 15 parts per billion. It goes down to 10 parts per billion, at which a utility has to take action on a given customer's water supply. Under this rulemaking, I'm sorry, it still says proposed, because when we drafted this slide, it was earlier in the week. We didn't know it was going to be finalized yesterday. But so under the rulemaking, which is now final, New York City could be required to distribute water filters, and we are already required to provide notification to customers. As part of the existing rules that date to 2020, we have been undertaking a mandatory cataloging of lead service lines across the city, and later this month we will be starting a mandatory notification process. And one thing I will say, insofar as there is always comfort in being a crowd, or in a crowd, New York City is far from alone. We are far from kind of in the bottom of the class on this topic. I can speak more to that. This is a nationwide issue. This is something that all water utilities are going to be facing over the next several years. Next. Just to back up and do the reminder of what these things are. New York City's drinking water, when it is delivered from the water mains to a given customer's house, there is no lead. We have no lead in our water mains, we have no lead in our processing, nothing. However, until 1961, service lines were often made of lead. That is the connection from the water main to the property. In New York City, from the water main, that is considered private property. You all know that from our work with AWR. In general, this is not something that affects apartment buildings because it was never practiced for a large service line to be lead. This is really a 1 to 4 family home issue. But unfortunately, it is true that most homes built before the 1960s, if they have not replaced their service line since then, have a lead service line. Further, the service line gets a lot of attention, but it's not the only place that lead gets into our water because, of course, there are lots of lead and copper piping and solder, more often solder, in fixtures. That was not banned until 1986. And so homes built as late as 1986, the service line might not be lead, but there could be lead introduced into the water from the solder in the pipes inside the home, over which DEP has zero control, right? And that's an important point. And what that means is that because of the lead in the in-home plumbing, we can replace all the lead service lines, and eventually we will have to. But that will not eliminate the risk of lead in drinking water in New York City in 1 to 4 family homes. Next. We are, I think, better off than many because of the way we already manage and treat water quality to protect people from lead leaching into their water. So we do manage the pH of the water we supply very carefully, and we introduce corrosion inhibitors, or orthophosphates, are the chemicals that we put into the water. And what that does, the pH reduces the corrosive nature of the water, so it eliminates, or not eliminates, but it reduces the tendency of the acidity of the water to pull lead into it as it reacts with the plumbing. And the orthophosphates actually create a protective lining. They react with lead, and therefore create a protective lining around the lead, so that as the water travels through the service lines or the plumbing, it is less likely to pick up lead particles. In fact, as we see testing of water in homes that have lead service lines, many of them have very, very low levels of lead detected in the water. That is good. Now, the EPA is very clear. There is no safe level of lead in drinking water, so even a very small 1 part per billion, 2 part per billion is not considered safe, but it is below the action level, which until yesterday was 15 and has moved down to 10 now. However, we are we will, and this is on the next page, are these new stringent levels mean that chances are New York City will exceed the action level, we will be in violation in a couple of years when the first compliance period under the new rules come. We will be far from alone. This will, as I say, be a nationwide issue. This is not limited to New York City. As you know, every New Yorker can request a lead testing kit just by calling 311. They are asked to take a sample at the tap. There are guidelines for how they take that sample. They mail it in a prepaid way. Our lab up in Kingston does the testing, and we will get back to people if there are elevated results. And as I say, it is not the case that every home with a lead service line or lead plumbing winds up with these very high levels of lead in the water. There are recommended tests, a follow-on test kit. We can alert the Department of Health if that's appropriate. In some cases, we will provide a filtered drinking water pitcher. Next, our analysis suggests that right now we have about 150,000 lead service lines across the city. Again, for reference, there are a bit more than 800,000 service lines across New York. We think there are, so one thing we've looked very carefully at whether there is an equity, racial, or an environmental justice issue with lead service lines. There is not a significant correlation between income and lead service lines. We have lead service lines in very low income neighborhoods and high concentrations. We have lead service lines in very high income populations. Neighborhoods in the Bronx, places like College Point in Queens, neighborhoods in Staten Island. It really has to do with when the homes were built, not how wealthy the neighborhood is, because even pretty high income neighborhoods, frankly, you don't replace your service line until it breaks. And so if the lead service line has been there since 1950, the home could be very valuable. It could be in a high income neighborhood. People haven't done those upgrades. The single most effective way to reduce lead in water, if it is there, is to replace the service line. This is a cost of between $5,000 and $15,000. You can do the math. It will cost about $2 billion to replace all of the lead service lines in New York City. There's a lot of talk about how the bipartisan infrastructure law is funding this. It is contributing to funding this, but I will point out that particularly because New York City, as I have mentioned to you many times in the past, New York City doesn't even get its fair share. We have been successful at getting money from the BIL that is channeled through the state. However, the state put a cap, so no municipality can get more than 25% of the BIL money for lead service lines. Therefore, we have gotten roughly 25% of New York State's allocated federal money, which I will point out is roughly the same amount as the city of Rochester, which is not exactly our size. But nonetheless, we are grateful. We've gotten $48 million to date. We are expecting to get roughly that same share. So from the BIL, we will get about $120 million if all goes well. But as you can see, that is not by any stretch the full nut that we would have to crack in order to get this. Yes? Thanks.
So you said this is private property, so the homeowners replace this, but the deal for VPs to replace this?
Well, so that is a very big question, and we are trying to understand kind of the legal issues. As you may know, the New York City Charter has what's called a gift clause. We are not allowed legally to make an investment in private property using city dollars. We are working through the legal issues with a lot of work that's been going on for several months now with the Law Department, OMB, and the Water Finance Authority to make sure that whatever we are doing with this is appropriate. What we are going to do, and there will be an announcement, in fact today, about how we are going to spend the $48 million that we have received. Because that is all federal and state money, we don't think there are any issues, and OMB and the Law Department have agreed that we can proceed with this next step. But as we do our work, which we have been doing for several months now, on what a more comprehensive solution to this problem would be, we are taking that very much into account. There is also the reality, getting back to what you all were just talking about in terms of all of the other capital needs, what it means for the rate hike. And I testified before the City Council in June on this topic, and personally, and I think we as an agency right now, we are not yet convinced that water ratepayers, even were it to be appropriate and legal, should be paying to upgrade the water line for a $3 million mansion in College Point or Riverdale, where we do find some of these things, right? There is obviously going to be a need for more assistance than the $120 million to help the low-income housing that is affected by this. And of course, it's not only homeowners. We have lots and lots of 1 to 4 family homes that are renters, right? Where the residents are renters. They do not have control over what their landlord does unless and until there is a legal mandate. And the bill that was being heard, that the administration that I testified in favor of, would have imposed a mandate over 10 years to have homeowners and landlords replace their lead service lines. There was opposition expressed to that because we did not come to the table with a plan for a funding or a subsidy effort that would support all low-income housing. And so while the City Council will or will not move forward on that particular legislation, of course we've expressed our opinion. We think it should, because in fact that mandate helps us get uptake as we go to homeowners and we say, hey, look, you are eligible. The money that we have is only, we have to apply for certain very targeted areas that are low income and have very high concentrations of lead service lines. That is what the state wanted, and so that is what we are doing. Even in those cases, because there is no mandate, because this is private property, we have to ask every homeowner whether they would like this free gift that we can now offer them. And while the majority say yes, some say no. And because there is no mandate, it is unfortunate. Our uptake, I think, is reduced. And we are under-equipped. And I wish the City Council had enacted that law, but we recognize that part of that bill that had been heard would have required DEP to come back with a plan to help low-income New Yorkers. But again, there was opposition. As far as I know, the City Council has put that legislation on hold.
And just to put perspective for the challenges that New York faces, the city of Chicago, which obviously is much smaller than New York, has 400,000 lead service lines estimated. They don't even know how many are where, and they think that could cost up to $8 billion. So our challenges are significant, but not as significant as some other cities, even when you take into account proportionality with that. And adding on to the cost that homeowners bear to replace lead service line, I assume this does not include the restoration of the land and what happens above grade as well, or is that included in the 15?
I believe it is more or less to leave things as they were, because frankly, homeowners will, they won't accept the huge trench.
Because that was the hard challenge with other cities of, yes, we can help you to replace our lead service lines, but what about the driveway and the paving we put in and the fence that we have, and that can crack it off, which
and that is complicated. Frankly, when we see people resist getting the free service that we are able to provide, it is usually around that. It is either I don't want the hassle and disruption of work being done on my home, or I'm worried about what you're going to do to my roses, or so on and so forth on the front. Which I don't mean to say that in a way that diminishes that. Of course, homeowners have invested a lot in many cases in their front yards or what have you. But I would also thank you, Adam, for adding that, and it's one of the reasons that of course, some of this is driven by the terrible situation that was in Flint, Michigan several years ago, which got national attention. Newark took a very aggressive approach to replacing lead service lines. Some advocates have suggested, well, why is New York not acting as aggressively as Newark? And the issue is chemistry, that neither Flint nor Newark was able to manage the pH. Newark was not adding the orthophosphates. So the actual water coming out of the tap in a home with lead in the piping and lead in the plumbing was much, much higher in a place like Flint, in a place like Newark, than it is today in New York City. And one of the messages I'm hoping we can get out is that while this is something we have to take seriously, it is also not something we should be panicking about. We don't want people shifting to bottled water because they are suddenly afraid of it. Bottled water is not as good, and it is far more expensive. And before people get extremely concerned that there is lead in their water, I am going to be asking them to get that lead testing kit, because again, we see a wide variation in cities with lead, in homes with lead service lines of the lead that we find in their water. Next slide.
And I'll note.
Sorry. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I have a
Please.
question. For the 150,000 buildings that have identified, do you have a sense of how many maybe schools or where there might be children?
There are no schools. So we do all New York City property. That's a really good point. Public housing, schools, city facilities have no lead. And in fact, DEP works with DCAS. Every 2 years, we have a process where we look at any buildings the city may have acquired to go back to see whether there might be lead in the lead service line, and DCAS will go ahead and replace it if that is found.
And I'll say that Newark both had the need to do it and they had one-shot revenue from a renegotiation the Port Authority used for the airport that gave them the resources. So if the Port Authority, the state, or any other entities would like to give us money to do this, I'm sure you would be happy to take a accelerated
If I
approach.
make one clarifying, the rule doesn't require the municipalities to pay for it.
That's, yes.
Right.
So the municipality must cause lead service lines under their control
Right.
to be changed. Because in many cities, the legal convention is that the homeowner owns the service line up to the property line and the city owns the service line in the street, which is not the case in New York. In many cases, EPA is saying it is under your control. I have to say, since the rules came out yesterday, we have not figured out. This was a major topic of testimony and feedback given to EPA. I don't know how they've addressed it, whether they are going to assert that the service lines are under our control, but as Al points out, even in that case, it is not a mandate that the city or the utility pay for the replacement. It is a mandate that the city or the utility cause the replacement, right? Which we could do by law.
Yeah.
Next. As I said, we have a number of efforts underway. Because of wear and tear, and again, it's one of the many reasons we think people should have service line protection when a service line breaks, as they do, right? Service lines really only last 30 to 50 years, so we are getting to that point where, frankly, many of the lead service lines in service, which by definition are 60 years old, will be failing, right? That people who have service line insurance, it will just get replaced because you're not allowed to replace it in kind. You're not allowed to repair it. You have to replace it. We are also accelerating this. We have now agreed, this is a new policy under this administration, that when we do water main or sewer work, DEP or DDC will replace any lead service lines that are uncovered at no charge to the homeowner. Again, we have to get them to agree, but nonetheless, we will offer to do that. The incremental cost of replacing a lead service line while we have the street opened up for a water main is small compared to the total cost of just doing it on its own. And then, as I've said, and as we will be talking about publicly later today, we have secured $48 million because as soon as this money became available, which was in 2022, we were on this. We developed an aggressive plan. I'm really pleased, and I will say I'm proud of the work that we did when the Environmental Facilities Corporation published their intended use plan for this money and had to rank all of the applications they received. Ours were in the top 5. Had they not put the 25% cap on us, we would have gotten 50% of the money, because my direction to the staff was New York City is roughly 50% of the state's population. We're going to apply for exactly 50% of the grants and 50% of the loans. And in fact, one thing, it was a mixture of grants and loans, and just a week or so ago, the governor announced that the state was converting all of the loans into grants. So this is now a full grant program. So anyway, but it is only targeted because we applied for specific locations within Brooklyn and Queens that, again, were very low income and very high concentrations of these. So we can literally go down the block and basically all of the homes have that service level. Next.
I'm sorry. So how will the customers, so they're targeted, so are they going to be notified?
Yes.
how-
We have done direct outreach
Direct.
to every eligible customer. That has actually been going on for a couple of months now. So one of the reasons that we are able to do an announcement today is we know we have broad participation. Again, it is not 100%, unfortunately. I believe the last number I saw was about 85%, but again, don't hold me to that. But you know, it is unfortunate that 15% of eligible people are going to say no to this, which means that it will be higher cost, that the risk will continue for the people who are living there, and then at some point there will be a cost either to them, or if there is some broader city program, to the city or the ratepayers, because we do not have that law in place that requires them to say yes. By the way, that is one of the things that Newark did, that Newark enacted a law that basically said, you're allowed to say no to the free gift, but once you say no, you have to do it on your own dime within 6 months. And that is not the law in New York. It is why it is so necessary. And I will just say I'm very frustrated with some of our advocates who usually we are on the same page with, because they are frankly letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. And thanks to their opposition to that law, we have 15% of eligible homeowners who are saying no to this. I think it is a really bad move and ideologically driven and not practical. Next. As I said, the existing, until yesterday, lead and copper rule already requires DEP, like every other utility around the country, to do a direct notification. And so later on this month, going into November, there's kind of a rolling schedule that is governed by the regulation. We will be mailing or emailing, depending on if we have an email address for a given customer, a notification. That notification actually had to be approved. Literally, the letter going out with my signature over it had to be approved by the New York State Department of Health. And so it is highly structured, and it requires us to let everybody know anybody whom we believe has a lead service line, we are telling them we think you have a lead service line. If we don't know whether you have a lead service line, if we can't get an indication from our records that you don't, we have to let them know. And there are a couple of other smaller groups that are in there, and this letter includes basically what I've said here, what we are doing, what these things are, what the risks to your family might be, where to get testing, whether children should be tested. And it also includes the 4 items on the right-hand side, which is that if you have a lead service line or if you have lead plumbing, and as again I said, replacing the lead service line is not a panacea because of the potential risk remaining in lead plumbing, things that you can do, and this is about running your water first thing in the morning. There's very little risk kind of later on in the day because that water is not spending a lot of time sitting in your lead service line, sitting in your piping, but it is really first thing in the morning in a home where everybody's been asleep for 6 or 8 hours, right? If you're drinking the first water that's been sitting all night in your plumbing, in your service line, that is when you have risk. And so it is about running the shower, running the toilet, flushing the water for 30 seconds to 2 minutes before you fill your coffee maker or take your first drink of drinking water or put water on the stove, I don't know, to make oatmeal or something. That's one of the things, making sure you use cold water, because cold water, of course, there's never hot water running through a service line, but if you have lead in your plumbing, hot water is more likely to leach lead into the water than cold water. So if you're cooking, you want to use cold water. Lead particles can accumulate in the screen. That, you know, if you in your faucet, there's always a little screen there, so you want to take the step of cleaning that out regularly, and then of course get your plumbing checked, get your service line checked. And then next, I think we had one more. Or was that it? That was it? No, that was it. So those are the messages we will be saying, and again, I'll reiterate this fact: we don't want people to panic. We don't want people to shift to drinking bottled water. We want people to take measured steps. Replacing lead service lines is not a panacea, but it is good practice, and it is something that we are both doing with the dollars that are available to us, and we are working on plans for how we might do it more broadly.
If there's a customer that wants to go find out if they have a lead service line, is there a way to find that information, or is it only the notification that's coming?
Well, yes, so there is a database that is available. People can go to DEP, to our website at nyc.gov, and they would be able to get to the database. We are not notifying everybody, frankly, just because of the cost, that you don't have a lead service line.
Right.
But it is something that Narissa and Albert and I have talked about whether there is a broader set of notifications that we should just do as part of kind of good hygiene to customers and potentially even all residents about their water service that we don't do. That I think it is probably a good thing, because it is also reassuring, so that people don't worry, oh, did the letter get lost in the mail, or whatever. And we are bracing, and Albert, I know, has been getting his customer service staff and working with 311 to be ready that as these notifications go out, we are going to get a lot of inbound requests. So that is there. But I will point out, what we are doing, the notifications, is not based on testing. It is based on our records. And our records may be incomplete, because almost by definition, one of the things we do, we look at the tap cards, which come anytime somebody seeks a connection to one of our water mains. But by definition, if we think you have a lead service line, it means that our last tap card is from before 1961, right? And while our records are good, they are not perfect. And so among the things we are going to be asking homeowners and customers, that if you think your service line has been replaced between now and 1961, you need to let us know, because it might be a record-keeping issue on our site. Okay. Happily, this next presentation is not all me. Boy, I feel like I've done a lot of monologuing. But we have been talking to you now for some time that, frankly, the many-year tradition of saying that we are suspending enforcement of MCP, to my mind, is just bad management. Because if you have a program and for 9 years you are just saying, well, we've got that program in place, but we're not going to enforce it, you really need to rethink the program. And so, as I told you several months ago, starting earlier this year, we've been taking a very deep look at the MCP, what we wanted finally to give you today is some of our first thinking on where it should go. We told you back a couple of months ago as part of rate setting that we were not just going to head into enforcement, because what we found warranted a broader rethink. We've been doing that. I'm really grateful to Albert, who's led the work. I think Josie, I saw come in. I don't know if Josie, oh yeah, Josie on Albert's staff, who's done a lot of the actual analysis of this, which is not straightforward, so it's required some real sleuthing, and I'm grateful to Josie for that. But just to recap before I turn it over to Albert, we have to go back to remember what MCP is there for, right? And it does a couple of things at once, which is why it's frankly not immediate and straightforward to rethink it. It provides predictability both to the customer and to us. It is very helpful that we have a number of customers who pay their annual bills all at once at the beginning of the fiscal year, and to promote conservation. one of the things we found is that there is a much greater variability in terms of usage among MCP customers. And there is, kind of in keeping with the idea that the 80-20 rule governs so much of life, there is a small group of super users where the intent of this program is probably not being fulfilled. So we have to think about it. In fact, while I've been worried about the fact that we've said we're suspending enforcement, in fact, compliance is nowhere near as far off as I had been worried. Right? And so, so we actually have many of these customers who are technically in compliance. This is also, in part by design, in part inadvertently, a component of what DEP has and the Water Board has done to assist affordable housing in New York City. And so that also makes this intricate because we don't want unintentionally to do something that might make sense from a revenue point of view, from a water conservation policy point of view, but might actually disproportionately impact affordable housing in the city. And therefore, the reason we are bringing this to you well in advance of thinking about our rates next season. And it may be that we ask for rate making off-cycle to address MCP, but it is not necessary. So that's our current hypothesis. This is something to get ready to address in April. So we want to engage with you early on because this is going to be a complex topic, and I would love your thoughts and feedback. And with that, I want to turn it over to our Deputy Commissioner for your customer service.
Thank you so much, Ray. So next slide. So I think, just taking a step back, and this actually really jives nicely with what Rick was talking about earlier in terms of the theme of long-term planning, right? And, we're fortunate that one of the things that didn't come up when we're talking about long-term planning is water conservation, but it doesn't mean that we're not thinking about it. It's obviously a little bit of a different priority. We're fortunate that climate change is coming. It means that Northeast is getting wetter, but it also means that the likelihood of a larger drought becomes higher, sort of counterintuitive. So we wanted to share that as part of how, when we're thinking about the multifamily conservation program, conservation in the name, and remember that we're billing $1 billion a year roughly on this program out of roughly a total of $4 billion total. It's an enormous amount of the consumption that happens citywide, and that's why it's important for us to consider the conservation component, but balanced against other factors, as Rick explained. Next slide, please. And so this has been a fun one for me to work on because this was actually the first project that I took on when I started with DEP back in 2011. And as Rick was alluding to, we did a fresh look at this, and Rick always says, show me the data. And I learned a lot by doing this because this was something that we really hadn't given that larger deep dive for a long time. And just as a reminder, the customer benefits from this program being on a flat rate, you get bill predictability. It's by design meant to be a little bit of a premium in terms of if you're a normal residential unit, you're managing things well, you have efficient fixtures, you probably would be better off on meter charges by design. However, as we've seen, customers are making the choice to remain on the program because they believe it's beneficial. There could also be some default bias at play, right? We need to be honest about that. I think it's also important to acknowledge that there's a benefit for the utility. So in the before times, before the multifamily conservation program, we actually billed people on a fixture charge. So my predecessor would be getting into disputes with customers about literally the number of toilets, the type of toilets and sinks in a property. We'd have to do inspections. It was Byzantine. And so moving to a straight per unit charge, something where the Department of Finance buildings has a set record that we could just say, you've got 100 units, we're going to bill you at the 100 units times the unit rate. Simple, easy, while still maintaining that consistency and capped bill for customers that find that attractive. It's at $24,000 currently, and that's down from $30,000 from before. But of course, there have been folks who decided to move off. There have also been new entrants. And in terms of the requirements, when we talk about enforcement or compliance, it's important to talk about what that means. So first, there's the type of property. So it needs to be 4 units or higher, multifamily, residential. Property needs to be metered and have a meter reading device.
They're not supposed to be delinquent for more than 90 days. That's not true in all circumstances, as we'll see in a little bit. At least 70% of the fixtures, mainly our focus has been toilets, must be of a high efficiency nature. And that there's conservation monitoring where we're looking for, and if we find, and if they have leaks, they're supposed to address them, otherwise they risk their eligibility. The next slide talks about this deep dive on consumption. And I know a histogram is always a lot of it to chew, but if you just focus your attention on the right-hand side here, you'll see what the commissioner was talking about in terms of super users. These are folks who, a large number of customers are using at least double the assumed consumption on a per unit rating, and in some cases, much more. And so that immediately opens questions in terms of what is going on in these buildings. Are there extreme leaks going on? Are there different occupancy situations? Do you have commercial uses that are not properly separately metered? So taking a look at this on balance, and we're talking about consumption here because you also see, I apologize, I'm a little colorblind, so I'm not best with color. Red, the orange is color, represents meters that are older. So a meter over time slows down. And so on the left-hand side of this dividing line between the folks who are using less on average than the rate they're paying, a lot of those meters are older, which means that if and when we replace them, a lot of them will move further to the right because then we'd be accurately reflecting their consumption. And I want to take this as an opportunity to talk about how we are currently in partnership with our friends at OMB reinvesting in a major way in our meter and meter reading infrastructure, and that's going to help, as we talked about in previous board meetings, about return on investment. These are great investments to bring back revenue. It's also an important reminder that we need to invest in our monitoring capacity to know what type of consumption is happening citywide, and for these customers to make sure that they're able to make the most informed decision. And so we've been prioritizing revenue generating meters over the last 5 years. It's more due to a lack of funding, but now that's changing, and so we're going to be able to tackle this as well.
Can I just interject
Please.
another thing for which I am grateful for your investment in our strategic consultant? It was McKinsey that identified the very high return on investment for small and medium-sized meter replacements, where they basically pointed out that replacing all of them, I think, had a 5-year payback, and replacing the oldest had like a 2-year payback. And at the time, I think we were on a 25-year replacement cycle.
Wasn't good.
For meters that could only last for 10 years. Right? And so it is great that that has yielded a clear investment in this really important component of, as Albert always points out, the cash register for utility.
Thank you. Next slide, please. And so just a deep dive on compliance here, and I want to highlight sort of the top table all the way to the right to say that 75% of customers are in compliance. When I actually saw that number after running the data, I was surprised because we've talked about it for so long as being this sort of huge population that's out of compliance. So that's the good news story. That being said, as we dug deeper and looked at different things, there's a few things I wanted to highlight. So the first you'll see, and I think this is really important, is that NYCHA is in compliance. That's not where NYCHA was when this program was introduced back in 2012. And that is because of the fact that we've partnered with them and funded investments in installing meters and meter reading technology. And to their credit, they've taken a large initiative to fund and install efficient fixtures to put them in a better place. So that's really helpful when we're thinking about what comes next for the program. To know that NYCHA will be in a good place is really helpful, especially when we're talking about enforcement. The other thing is that we found that even properties that, and this is the 1800 towards the top, even those that have low flow fixtures, they still have inordinately, there's folks that have inordinately high consumption, and there's some folks that we can see based on their consumption that even though we don't know, back to Ritz's point about records from the 1960s or 80s or 90s, they've never told us they have efficient fixtures, but the data shows that they most likely do. And so that could be sort of saying, we can say, all right, we think they're in compliance, but there are folks who are not. And then there are other groups of smaller populations And some of these overlap in the bottom table that don't have a meter at all, don't have an MTU, and one that's a bigger focus for me is customers that have owed us money for at least over a year. As you recall, in the program, not supposed to be delinquent for more than 90 days. However, we have to be honest, this is the balancing act, right? We've talked to HPD, we've talked about Mitchell-Lamba properties. These are properties that are going through challenges. We want to strike that balance between ensuring that we're taking care of our ratepayers. We also don't want to be excessively punitive. Next slide, please. And so this is really a focus on super users, the new term of art. And I want to emphasize when we talk about market rate, that doesn't mean that this is the latest glass tower, right on southern Central Park. These are just properties that are not in, not NYCHA, not in regulated agreements with HPD or HDFCs. And so what we saw was that, to be honest, we were a little too focused on toilets. Never thought I'd say that, but that's where we were at, where it's not just fixture compliance, it's more than that. And what this analysis has shown us is that we need to do a deeper dive on the actual usage of the property with a focus on leaks. And some leaks, you might think, how could there be all these leaks going on and the property doesn't know about it? Some of them can be happening, could be interior plumbing, some of it could be the toilets running, but in ways that might not be as visible. And when there's not a connection between the amount of usage and the money on your bill, that's how those things don't get noticed. And so as we're taking a more prudent look, as we're thinking more strategically from a, where will we be in the next 5-10 years, we want to focus on this. And in these cases, what we need to balance is that we can't also inspect all 1,500 of these properties. We're going to need additional resources if we're going to tackle that in terms of potentially working with contractors to do these types of audits, because it is heavy work, but we think that it can yield benefits. Next slide, please. And this is just a little bit of a reminder about the importance of the affordable housing portfolio within the MCP. It's roughly 40% of the dollars, and again, it's always good to bring things back to the revenue, right? The $970 million a year that we're billing on this program. So we've got to make sure that we're finding that right balance, and so that's something that we're really cognizant of, and we want to make sure that our meters and our meter reading equipment is in a state of good repair, so that the data we have, so that when we're making these decisions, and ultimately when these customers are making these decisions about what program is right for them, that they have the data in place to make that best decision for them. Next slide, please. And the market rate properties, and this is where sometimes putting something on a map really helps illustrate things. I mentioned it's not just it's not south of Central Park. We've seen that a lot of these properties predominate in northern Manhattan, in the southern Bronx, and in central Brooklyn. And so we want to make sure that whatever program that we're doing takes unique, and the commissioner was talking about economic justice and environmental justice. We want to make sure that we're taking all these factors into consideration, especially knowing that affordable properties, or potentially one could term naturally affordable properties, have limited capital expenditure budgets, really are operating in a tight space. And that's why even some of these customers that might be paying a little bit more than they might need to if they were on meter charges want to pay a little bit of that premium for that consistency, so they never get a sticker shock. So that's something where we need to dive deeper and understand more about these properties, talk to these properties, and see really what's going on.
Are there really no customers in Staten Island?
Yes, and it's mostly because it's 4 units or higher, and it's predominated by.
Oh, really? There are none.
I know.
But there are
Wow.
actually none.
Just in this subset of people that are very on that high end of usage, yeah, there are none.
But it doesn't mean there are no MCP properties in Staten Island.
Oh, this is the map of the super users. This is not
So you guys are very good.
Very good.
Thank you.
It was a questionable one.
Yeah.
Part of the city is just gone.
Problem areas.
That's it.
Next slide, please. And so as Rit was saying, we're not coming with a proposal. This is more an update on the research we've been doing, and I've enjoyed this meeting tremendously because it's been a conversation, and part of what we wanted to get some input or start getting some initial reactions on are as we look towards next steps, you know, and we think about enforcement, you know, what type of off-ramps and opportunities to come into compliance should we be thinking about in terms of timelines for compliance, in terms of potential assistance for customers to address leaks, new programs. Omar always rightly talks about the leak forgiveness program as one of the greatest programs that's underutilized. Maybe we need to expand that, or maybe we need to retool that in a way that could work for these to provide some of that high-end protection while still driving an economic incentive, or more of an economic incentive towards conservation. We also want to talk about trade-offs, and as I've talked about, how do we find that balance between ensuring that we're approaching customers with the sensitivity that's required, also looking at our rate structure and knowing that we don't want to have any, and again, I want to be clear, we haven't done rate analysis, we're not there yet. This is more just at the exploratory stage, but we know that everything is connected to the money that comes in. And then just in general, what other factors should we be thinking about or considering? So I'd love to hear your feedback. I know there's been a lot of presentations, but it's important.
And if
to
I
us.
could just add, as Albert points out, this very much gets us into broader thinking about affordability. As you know, the idea of a quote-unquote lifeline rate is one of the things we have been studying as part of the sustainable rate analysis. There's also the reality is, as Albert pointed out, as we have been so focused, which we have been and will continue to be, on addressing our accounts receivable. Really grateful. Not only are we proceeding with notifications, the shut-off warnings, etc., we've been going through parks concessionaires that are overdue, like all sorts of things. We really have been doing a lot to get at that. The reality of the affordable housing providers in New York City that are in that significant element. By the way, we've made a lot of progress with BMT and the Portland Trust. And again, thanks to the diligence of Albert's team and his leadership. But one of the things we have not really figured out is how we address the many Mitchell-Lamas and similar types of housing complexes that are in significant arrears. I just happened to have a meeting at Con Ed the other day, and they happened to mention somewhat offhand how Mitchell-Lamas are one of their biggest challenges. And so to Albert's point, we have to protect the ratepayers, we have to get our revenue, but how we kind of make all of this work in a way that doesn't just force a new burden onto an important portion of the city's housing supply, onto our colleagues at HPD, etc., I think is worth some thinking. So this kind of integrating the sustainable rate study, our thinking on collections and MCP is part, I think, of some of the most exciting work we're going to be doing over the next 7 months.
Other questions, Rob?
Will you be sharing additional details about these concentrations? What kinds of buildings are these? So, because to address the problem, I think it would be important to understand at least public housing, private homes, businesses. Because I think we might need to offer different strategies. To your point, Michelle, one case example.
The short answer is yes, and in a follow-up conversation, we can certainly bring additional details. And part of what we're also doing, Rick encouraged us to do some sampling and case study inspections of different types of properties to really be on the ground. It might not surprise you that there's a correlation. The property manager is having tons of DOB violations, rat infestations. They're probably not great stewards of water conservation. So we're going to try to take some other data sources as well to inform and understand, and we're be happy to present additional.
Yeah, or it could be, you mentioned South Bronx, Uptown Manhattan. Is it a cultural thing, where if you're not the landlord and you don't pay for water
Mhm.
consumption, your notion that there's a water bill is just not there.
You're absolutely right, because there are some of those properties where we've looked and we don't believe there's a leak going on, but the consumption is incredibly high. And so there's obviously more there, and we want to be very considerate and conscious of any of those sort of cultural considerations or unique factors to this type of
We
system.
may have to do some sort of campaign that
Mhm.
helps people understand that, yeah, someone pays for water, for the water bill.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
fair
look,
enough.
and I think we and the mayor have been very explicit about that. It's something he's very much championed. But, you know, and I guess if I could say, you know, we're certainly, as Albert says, going to be looking in great detail at all of those factors. And some of it may not be really conducive to presenting to you in a formal setting like this. Anything we bring to you, we'll take that into account. And if any of you would like to engage in a deeper way, we'd be happy to schedule conversations or briefings or what have you in the out as much detail as you would like.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Mr. Chairman, I may need to depart. before
Understood.
this presentation. So, thank you for.
That's why we put the resolutions at the beginning of the meeting.
Exactly. So, I apologize.
Do what you have to.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
All right, let's, there was misinformed, so I'm taking over again, I
I can do
forgot.
it again.
Well, actually, if you don't mind,
Sure.
I'd love to hand it over to you in a
Yeah.
moment. So, this is another, much like we did with the strategic plan, it's a thank you and a report out on some resources that you all approved for us to take, which was funding our Fuse Fellows. It may have a not so ulterior motive as well, because we think it's worth doubling down on this one. But both of our, two of our three Fuse Fellows are in Marissa's part of the house, and she's very much played a direct role in the overall program. So if you don't mind, I would love to have you do this.
Sure, yeah, thank you. So, as Britt said, last year we sort of became aware of this program. It's a national program where people do mid-career placements into government. So these are people coming with 10, 15 years of private sector experience, but who are interested in spending some time working for the government. So as we were sort of getting the results from McKinsey and starting to kind of think about the strategy moving forward, we saw this as a really interesting opportunity to maybe start working on some of the nascent work coming out of the strategic plan. And so we sort of looked at 3 different areas. You can see it here, ratepayer, so someone working with Albert in BCS's team. The project was building a system to improve customer communications. We highlighted and looked at one decarbonization area, monetizing renewable energy projects, working with Jane Gajwani and our strong, mighty, small but mighty energy team. And then one in business processes, working with myself, looking at, it's called Improving Efficiency to Combat Climate Change, but it's really about business efficiency and business transformation. So next slide, please. Just a little bit to remind you about the program. Again, these are people, it's a national program. It's in many cities around city and state governments around the country. They've been working for about 10 years. They really look to place people around questions of climate, around questions of equity. So they're really interested in projects, people bringing projects that are going to address those kind of topics. They have a network, they bring the fellows together so that they can have peer support. They have resources, they have the past, the outputs of past work, libraries of sort of tools, of analyses that people can tap into. So it's a really interesting program where they support these folks as they're placed into government for these specific projects and kind of have this shared network of excellence around the country. Next slide, please. So they help us to actually find the people. So what's really interesting is, we sort of lay out the projects we're interested in, the kind of skill set the person might have. these are always sort of hard to find people you might not sort of be able to get that easily into government. And they go out and they find them. In the case of the person who's working for me, I could not believe how amazing the person was that they found. It was like shocking to me how, what a great person they found for us. The person was willing to come. So they do a really extensive search. They actually went out and looked for the person. So this person wasn't aware of their program, hadn't applied to the program, but they did what, private sector recruiters do, is that they looked out through LinkedIn, through other networks, to find the people with the right skill sets and actively went after those people and tried to see if they'd be interested to come to government.
And I'm sorry, Nurse, but I cannot stress enough how valuable this is. While I have been commissioner on 2 occasions, we have used a search firm. We have used kind of existing or easy to contract search firms. In both cases, frankly, it was an absolute failure. In one case, we went with an internal hire, and in the other case, it was frankly through my own personal network that I got a recommendation. Because we are unable to invest in kind of a true national level search and a top quality search firm, to be able to do this at what is really a mid-level, like in no circumstances would we be able to do this for an assistant commissioner or whatever. And so this is incredibly valuable at finding that needle in a haystack of somebody who is not in anybody's network for New York City government, has really appropriate private experience, and is eager and willing to make the shift into government. This is a huge portion of the value.
And the quality of the people, as you'll see, because we'll talk about the free folks, but it's really amazing. So next
At
slide.
any given time, how many females fellows are
Well, thanks to the funding that you approved last year, we've had 3 this year. So we'll sort of introduce them to you a bit more. But I mean, you could
I'm
have.
talking about the size of the program, nationally, how many?
Oh gosh, I'd have to look into that. I mean, it's. My impression is it's definitely over 100, but
Okay.
yeah, but I can look into
And they're moving into environments that they may never have seen before.
that. Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was a slide back, setting up employee benefits. Of course, you have to do that if you're going to bring them in government. But
Yes.
did we find, was that difficult for us?
No, because we pay, so they essentially employ them, and so we pay for their employment. So
Sure,
they have
sure.
this set up
Sure.
for them to be able to work that way. So
And again, I think
that makes it
part-
very streamlined.
Part of what they specialize in is people who, at that kind of midpoint in their career, are looking to make this shift. So, everybody comes to this knowing they're probably taking a pay cut, they're probably getting fewer benefits, but they're doing it for the other reasons, right? To draw people to public service. And it can be really hard for us to find those people in the private sector who are at that point where they are interested, right? It's very easy for us to find people who are in and always been around government, because we know those people, right? But it's hard to find people like this.
I'm sorry, Ms.
No, it's okay. So sorry, next slide, Omar.
This is,
Okay, thanks. So yeah, so actually this speaks to what I had mentioned before, which is that they also, one of the benefits to the folks who participated in this is they are coming into a specific posting at a specific city or state level, but they also have this national network of folks that they can tap into, that they have they have regular Friday meetings, they do sort of skill building, community building, networking. So they have this whole framework they can work within as well, which is great for them, which is one of the perks if their salary is much lower than it was before. Right, next slide. So we wanted to just tell you a little bit about the 3 folks who are with us this year. The first is working in Albert's team. So Albert, do you want to talk about Mary?
Yeah, awesome, absolutely. So Mary also has been a tremendous member of the team, and essentially just somebody who comes from the private sector thinking about customers and can then come here and bring that private sector mentality, creating voice of the customer metrics for us for the first time so that we actually know how our customers feel about us. And also, Evelyn, to your point earlier, not all of our customers speak English as their first language. How are we meeting and communicating with these customers? And then for anybody, how do we make sure that the information we're giving customers is as clear as possible? So sometimes just providing that excellent customer experience, I firmly believe, leads to revenue. It also leads to more efficient operations. Sometimes AI is awesome, but sometimes you don't need AI. You just need clear directions and instructions on how to navigate programs. And so very awesome. And a tremendous member of the team. Really excited about it.
Do you want to speak to this anymore? Or?
Nope.
And so then the next person, Mario, is working with Jane in the energy team. So again, I mean, this to me is the most clear example of someone who, it would be incredibly hard for us to work with in the level we're able to as he comes into DEP.
Easier
full-time.
for us to work with, hard for us to grab.
Hard for us to get, exactly. So he has,
He's great.
he has just decades of work in the energy sector, both in traditional energy, but also now in all of the kind of realm of new renewables and sort of really specialized energy sector work. So he's working, if you go to the next slide, he's working with Jane's team on several projects. One is we have our next gas to grid project that we're moving forward at Hunts Point. We have a big project to renew the digesters there. We're putting in, we're augmenting that by putting in the next feed-in station, the next gas to grid station, new technology, the one at Newtown Creek, 10 years ago. Now there are many more different options there. So he's helping us think through the business model, looking at all of the documentation we've been doing so far, helping point us to things we should be thinking about as we apply for the federal funding, which could be up to almost $90, $100 million potentially for the project. So that's been incredibly helpful, just having his wealth of knowledge in that area. But he's also looking at something that we just haven't had the capacity to do because we're such a small team, which is looking at the sewer and effluent thermal heat recovery type projects where, this is just something we haven't had the capability to do, but there are really interesting technologies coming out. How do we potentially create energy from the thermal heat, in our system? So that's really exciting. And the last person who came to us is working directly for me, Martin. Again, really interesting background. He's set up project management offices, program management offices in multiple, global companies. Pearson was his latest one where he worked in teams like around the globe, putting in technology and new business processes for them. He's worked at Cambridge University doing entire organizational reorgs for them. So he's done organizational design, project management design, and he's coming to us, if you go to the next page, to look at, actually back to Jupei's question around operational efficiency. So our business operations, I think we have a lot of opportunity to really streamline. We have a really low use of IT for efficiency. So he's looking at how to set up a project management, program management office for us that would start off looking at the portfolio on the CFO side. So whether it's procurement, budget, HR processes, probably moving into fleet, working with Albert's team, potentially BCS, and working hand in hand with our IT team to really look at how we can do business process redesign, IT systems, to do a step change in efficiency over the next 3 to 5 years. So he's helping to put together what might that look like for DEP, what kind of structure do we need, what kind of resources, people would we need. And he's actually doing a first project working on our capital plan and how do we actually pull, we have no smart data, we have sort of dumb PDF data about the projects we want in our capital plan. So building a new database for all of that data so we can actually do capital planning much more agilely and have a much better base of our data around capital planning. So that's a first flagship project where he's using all the new tools and templates he's been doing for project management for sort of major projects. So.
Great project.
This one particularly, I mean, not to downplay either of the other ones, but I don't think I can stress enough to you all how, just like McKinsey identified small meter and medium-sized meters as just an obvious go-do kind of initiative for the agency because of the return on investment that it offers us, PMO is exactly the same, right? And it's easy to miss because, well, it's just headcount or whatever, right? But if we can significantly improve all of these processes, it is just like the work that Narissa led in 2022 and 2023 to cut our procurement cycle by more than 50%. And the only reason that we have been able to deliver our full capital plan for 2 years in a row, which DEP had not been able to do for a decade, right, is because of the process redesign that Narissa led. This is that across multiple aspects of our business processes. We are also, and Catherine Mallon, our COO, has been leading an effort among the operating bureaus to develop operating metrics, also in part informed by some of the things that McKinsey identified, so that we have a true scorecard so that our operating bureaus are looking at both fundamental performance, which they currently do generally quite well, but also cost effectiveness and asset maintenance and condition, right? Those are 3 topics that we have to balance and always keep in mind. And at some point, I expect PMO will probably also help in creating the structures and systems that will facilitate it.
So this project, this program runs from April to April. Is there a time frame? So we're sort of halfway through this cohort of 3, and we're sort of now just talking about perhaps what we might want to do next year to bring back perhaps some ideas and perhaps some other requests for support potentially for this.
And appreciate that, given that these are water board funds paying for this, that these 3 projects directly tie to our interests, on the billing
Exactly.
system, customer, and
Yeah.
kind of gas to grid between create revenues and optimize the use. So thank you for being a good steward of our fiscal resources. Yes.
Well, the punchline was that this is the 6-month mark, and we'll be probably coming back to review for
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. But I guess this is just by way of saying this has worked really well. Do not be surprised if we ask for more.
Yes.
I wouldn't have been
She was
surprised.
a little more subtle on that. But we heard that.
It's not my thing.
Yes.
Not my thing, as you know. At long last, I think that is all we have.
It was action-packed. 2 days like, I'm
Yeah,
at it.
sorry.
No, no.
Sorry.
Thank you for bearing through so many updates.
Well, this is, I appreciate them and just urge you guys to use the meetings to give these more frequently as well, so that we don't always have to wait until the end. They were great and really, really impressive. Sorry.
I was going to ask if there's any more business to come before the board. Hearing nothing. We're adjourned.
There you go.